You know, I've found myself after retiring from the Army and Special Forces like 11 years ago. I found myself giving talks and being on stages all over the world, really. In my pursuit of human connection, I've given 3 TED Talks on 3 different stages. I've performed a play on Steppenwolf Theater. One of those iconic theaters, like 600 people in the room. Big rooms, big people, but for me, it all begins and ends with communities. I grew up in a little town called Mount Ida, Arkansas. Not this town, but a lot like this town. Way smaller than this town. Well, we didn't even have a stoplight. Still don't. I think 36 people in my graduating class. But it was growing up in that little town that I learned a lot about the world, believe it or not. And honestly, probably learned more about how to interact with people, how to treat people, how to behave as a Special Forces officer in new places. But one thing I kept seeing consistently as I traveled around the country, whether it was as a Green Beret, whether it was as a playwright, whether it was as a public speaker or, an actor, was that communities are at the heart of everything. We're social creatures. Humans are social creatures. We navigate the world based on our sense of connection, and communities are at the heart of that. Communities are struggling right now. And, I find myself, anytime I get a chance, spending as much time in communities as I can, because I believe they are at the center of gravity. For example, in the United States, but not just the US, anywhere in the world, it's our communities that are the heartbeat of thriving and how we get through tough times. And I don't mean that in a kumbaya kind of way. I mean like the biology of it, the collective biology, the collective sociology of a community is so important. And anytime I can, I come to these communities and try to interact with the people that live there and learn as much from them as hopefully I share with them. But like being here in Cleveland, Tennessee, speaking at a Rotary Club, one of the things that I see in the country today is there's so much what I call churn. In my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, I describe what's happening around us. The enemy that we face as Americans is not the Democrat or the Republican that disagrees with your political views and unfriends you on Instagram. The enemy is not the person that cuts you off in traffic. The enemy is not even the one who wants to change the institutional approach to how we do things in the country. The enemy is what I call the churn. And it's this set of social conditions that are all around us, and they really are built around distraction, disengagement, the absence of purpose, disconnection from ourselves and from our human nature and the natural world, and distrust, the ultimate manifestation of just the loss of that connection. It manifests as distrust, and the ultimate manifestation is distrust, and this loss of trust in one another is what is really tearing us apart. It causes us to behave in a primal way. It causes us to actually go back to a very almost animalistic, tribalistic behavior. And you see it happening all over the country today, these in-groups and these out-groups that are actually taking each other on rather than these higher level connections that bridge across all these trust gaps. And these manifestations of trust, distrust, are the worst of the worst. I saw it as a Green Beret because what it does is it causes us as humans to withdraw into our little circles. A form of bonding trust where we only trust the people who look like us, think like us, and it's primal, it's thousands of years old. This is what all mammals do. When we get scared, when we're worried about our threat conditions, we withdraw instead of bridging across these various in-groups. What makes our country so amazing, Alexander de Tocqueville talked about this when he came over here well over 100 years ago. He talked about America being this experiment of individualism rightly understood. He was fascinated by this notion that you could have a civil society where you put emphasis on the individual, not emphasis on the group. Because see, that's where we all come from. We're social creatures, we're primal creatures. We've learned to navigate the world by forming groups, by forming clans, tribes, qualms. And this is how we've survived for thousands and thousands of years. And over time though, In this country and other places, we've learned ways to create civil societies that are not just in groups, but rather experiments in another kind of trust. A trust that author Robert Putnam of Bowling Alone calls bridging trust or bridging social capital. And it's this idea that what if in-groups and out-groups who are bumping up against each other and even treating each other like mortal enemies, what if we could create a society where you bridge across those groups, where there's a level of social capital, these tangible and intangible linkages that actually bridges across that. And that is what the founders of this country actually had in mind. They got a lot of it wrong because clearly there were individuals in the country that were not free to pursue that until years later. But the idea of this bridging trust where you didn't just focus on your in-group, you didn't just focus on the people in your family or your tribe, you actually bridged beyond that. It's a fascinating thing, and again, it's what de Tocqueville called individualism rightly understood. It's this notion that you put emphasis on the individual, but also you never forget your past. You never forget where you came from. You never forget the sense of community. Because without community, we won't make it. Without community, I don't think it's possible for us to survive the things that are going to be thrown at us inside and outside this country. And that's why, as much as I can, I love to come to communities and engage and spend time with them, like I'm doing with the Rotary Club tonight, because it's those kinds of groups, those bottom-up groups, that really have not just defined this country, but have frankly led us through some of the darkest periods that we've ever faced. I know to a lot of people it feels like this is a novel set of circumstances that we're facing in the leadership challenges that we face today, but the reality is we've been here before. Robert Putnam talks about in his book Bowling Alone, a period in the early 1900s where the country was so divided. The country was so torn apart, haves and have-nots. There was a huge wealth disparity. Infrastructure was falling apart. Immigration was a massive issue. And the pundits were saying, America's on our last days. This is it. And all of a sudden, a couple of drunks in Akron, Ohio, who couldn't get sober, Dr. Bob and Bill W., they said, hey, let's have a meeting. Nobody's coming. Let's have a meeting. And so they started a group, two of them, and they called it Alcoholics Anonymous. And you know what? It just so happened that group grew and grew, one town at a time, one need at a time, until millions and millions of people, not just Americans, citizens of the world, found sobriety. And this guy included, 24 years, thanks to Dr. Bob and Bill W. having that meeting in the little town of Akron, Ohio. This happened in the early 1900s in that dark period. Guess what else? The Rotary Club in Illinois formed because there needed to be more emphasis on small businesses and communities. The Junior League, the NAACP, Future Farmers of America. All of these community-based organizations, bottom up, formed by leaders without titles, who saw that nobody was coming and that they still needed to get big stuff done. If we're waiting for top-down leadership, institutional leadership to save us, we're deluded. They're not coming. And that's just the way that it is. And I think we're on the front edge of another upswing again. I think what happened in Afghanistan with the volunteer veterans groups that stood up like Flanders Fields, Moral Compass, Operation Pineapple Express, that jumped into the fray when our government didn't honor the promise to our Afghan allies and help them. I think that's what we're on the precipice of again. I think we're on the precipice of another upswing to get big stuff done in a time of real challenge. But it's going to take leaders at every level, at communities just like this, like at the Rotary Club that I'm speaking to here in Cleveland, Tennessee tonight. That's where leadership starts, and we model it for the rest of the country. We model it for our politicians. We model it for our bureaucrats. We demonstrate what right looks like, and if we have to shame them into it, we shame them into it, but there's pressure from the bottom up to lead responsibly, to get big shit done when nobody's coming. And what I'm saying is that's possible for anybody. It is another upswing that we are on the cusp of right now. And it's something that I'm really excited about. It's something that I believe is absolutely going to happen in this country. But it starts from the bottom up, not the top down.